I have spent the last several years of my career working in the social sector. I've had significant interaction with philanthropy, and I've also been working on wealth inequality. And in this work, I often encounter the concept of generosity. For example, a wealthy individual might make a large philanthropic donation, and people might say, wow, that is so generous. And I've been thinking about, what does that actually mean, and how should we think about it? And so I've developed a framework for generosity that may be helpful in assessing what is it that individuals are doing, what might we expect of them, and how do we think about what generosity really means. So a starting point would be definitions. So when we say someone is generous, does it mean just doing something, anything nice for someone? And does it matter what it is? Does it need to be a sacrifice on behalf of the person who does it to help others? Or does it simply need to be something that is seen as significant by the recipient? And so what matters is how the recipient sees it and not the size relative to what the donor is capable of. And as we think about generosity and philanthropy, again, how much does someone need to give to be generous? Is any amount generous, or in some ways, does it matter how much the individual has to give in the first place? So does the amount given need to be a sacrifice in some way or significant? And then how does this connect to expectations? What expectations should we have of our fellow citizens when we think about giving to others and the concept of generosity? So a starting point might be thinking about the wealth level of the person making the contribution. And wealth levels could range from people who are in debt, so far below zero or around zero wealth, starting to accumulate wealth, so 10, 50, maybe $100,000 in wealth, making quite a bit of progress, so maybe even up to $1 million in wealth, and then magnitudes far in excess of this, 5, 10, $30 million, maybe even 100 million, a billion or more. And so a range of potential wealth levels on behalf of the person who is making the donation or doing something generous. And so these wealth levels tie to accumulation goals for these individuals. So for people who have negative wealth and are far below zero, their real goal is to reduce their debt or eventually to get out of debt. And once they're about at zero wealth, to try and stay out of debt. As they begin to gather more wealth, first they want to continue to stay out of debt and then start accumulating. As they make more progress, they want to continue to accumulate and eventually moving towards what might be considered a threshold of having enough. And so we might think about something like $30 million in wealth as being enough. This would be an amount that would enable people to have a very nice first home, probably at least one additional home, nice cars, able to pay for kids' college and end-of-life expenses and a very lavish lifestyle, and never have to work again. And so perhaps that might be a goal to achieve that level of wealth, that someone never has to work again and has a wonderful life, and maybe that might be enough. But then what are the wealth accumulation goals for individuals who have wealth in excess of that amount? And how might we think about what that means? And then how does this connect to generosity and to thinking about the donations we might expect people in these different categories to make? Well, for people who have wealth that's below zero, we might say it's unwise for them to donate to others. It might be a very kind gesture, but we might all first and foremost wish that they could get out of debt themselves. As people are around zero wealth, again, we might not expect them to make donations to others. It would be a wonderful gesture, but perhaps we again might say the main goal is for them to stay out of debt. As individuals start making progress and accumulating some level of wealth, but still relatively modest, we might think it's reasonable for them to start making contributions and donations to others, but of a relatively modest amount. And so how might we think about how much this should be? So something in the range of maybe 1 to 10% of net income might be reasonable. So for an individual of relatively low wealth, if they earn, say, $50,000 in net income, we might expect them to give maybe between $500 to $5,000. Making contributions in excess of that might be unreasonable since they're in the process of trying to accumulate wealth themselves. But it also might be reasonable to expect that people in this category could start contributing to others. As we move to individuals who might be accumulating more significant wealth, $500,000 or even $1 million, might it make sense for us to assume they might contribute more to others? And so perhaps someone who's making $150,000 a year might be expected to give at least $15,000. So 10% of that or more as a donation, because again, they've got pretty significant wealth that they're gathering. And so might it be reasonable for us to expect them to be able to contribute more? As people move into the next category where maybe they've got $5-10 million, and so they're really doing quite well and are still trying to accumulate to get to the point where maybe they never have to work again, but maybe we might expect them to be able to contribute more. So maybe something more like 20% of net income. So an individual making $200,000 a year, might we expect them to give $40,000 as a donation, given the fact that they've got already $5-10 million. So how might we think about this? And how generous might we consider that to be? As individuals get to a point where they're at the level of having enough, they never need to work again and have a very luxurious lifestyle, what would the goal be for them to continue to accumulate more? And so why might we expect that they might contribute 100% of their net income in a year, because they're at a place where additional accumulation may not be necessary. And if someone does do that, does give away all of their income, should we think of that as generous, or how should we think about it? And then for individuals who are in very, very wealthy categories, 50 million, 100 million or more, how should we think about what generosity means and what might we expect of them? So for an individual making this level of wealth, might it be reasonable for us to assume that they no longer need to accumulate wealth, in which case they might donate 100% of their net income plus a percentage of the wealth they have over 30 million, as they might work their way back down towards having enough, never having to work again, still having a very luxurious lifestyle, but then contributing those excess dollars to help others. And might this be how we think about generosity? So some kind of framework like this might be useful as we think about what this means based on an individual's wealth, the accumulation goals they have given that wealth level, and then what we might expect of them as we think about contributions they could make to others. And so as we come back to the definitions, what does it mean to be generous in terms of doing nice things, potentially sacrificing, and doing things that are seen as significant? And then as we think about donations and philanthropy, how much needs to be given for it to really be considered generous? Does it need to be a sacrifice for the individual involved? And what expectations should we have of others? And is it reasonable for us simply to assume that anything anyone gives is great? Or might we actually expect more, especially of individuals who have more wealth? And as individuals accumulate more, we can realistically expect them to do more to help their fellow citizens.